Hey there, class. It is me, Faisal, coming at you with your video of the day. So, uh, at this point, your CPT for the final end of this course, the last assignment you're going to do with me, has been posted. So, let me talk about it. What it is. It's a 5 or 6 paragraph essay, right? So roughly the same length as the last one, right? So 5 or 6 paragraphs is what you are doing there, right? I'm not going to put a word count for a 4C essay, right? So just 4 or 5 paragraphs, no, not 4 or 5, 5 to 6 paragraphs, right? Roughly the same length as the last one. Um, and it's going to be, of course, about Sherlock Holmes, right? Because that's what we're dealing with, right? This has sort of become the Sherlock Holmes course. So, I've got 4 questions here, right? And let me go through each of them, right? First question is, explain the role of Watson in the story and why he's so important to our understanding of the story. Could this story be told without Watson, or is it impossible to tell the story? Um, or is wait, hang on, let me rephrase that. Or would that be impossible? Let me just make that a little bit more clear. That'd be impossible. There we go. I think that's a little better. Nevertheless, so we touched on this in one of the short answer questions, right? The role of Watson in the story, right? So this one is really focusing on him and specifically what he does in the story, right? Because Watson is more of the star of Hound of the Baskervilles than any of the other Sherlock Holmes stories, right? Because Watson essentially plays the role of the investigator for a good chunk of this, right? For Sherlock Holmes isn't even there for half of the story, right? So if you're a fan of Watson and want to talk about Watson, then that's your question. Number 2. Explain what it is about this novel that makes it a page turner. How to say so Arthur Conan Doyle keep the reader interested and engaged throughout the story. So this is really inspired by some of the things that were said during today's presentations, right? About how people are interested and really happy to be reading this. So you're going to ask the question of what it is about the story that keeps you like that, right? So if you want to write about that subject, go ahead. Third question. Holmes brings the culprit to justice at the end of the story, successfully discuss the case that Holmes builds here and how it manages to come together. Right, so this one, straightforward, right? How does he solve the case? Don't just summarize the story there. Don't just tell me, oh, well, he found this clue and he found that clue. Tell me more about what Holmes actually does, how he thinks, right? So if you could talk about things like deductions and reasoning and all of that sort of stuff, that would be great. So that's number 3. And then number 4, I think is the most exciting question for me. The traditional depiction of Sherlock Holmes is that of an extremely logical man who looks at the world in a completely rational way. There are few women in the books and short stories, and Holmes himself never gets married because he feels women are a distraction. Is being rational an entirely male trait, as is depicted in the Sherlock Holmes stories, or can women be just as rational as men? Or, in other words, could a woman be Sherlock Holmes? So, I'm very interested in this question. Now that I've thought of it, I think that's a really good question. I want to hear some answers about this. So, it's your choice whether you do it or not. But let me just say, if you're aiming for 95 or something like that, go for that question, right? Impress me. So that question, right, is more, if you're going to do a question that asks you to do more research outside of the book, right, it's going to be number 4, right? So if you're interested in doing a little bit of research and everything like that, then that's the question to do. But this question is really asking about gender, right? It's a stereotype, even in our society today, to say nothing of Sherlock Holmes's era, that men are rational, right, and they use their reason, while women are emotional, right? We have that stereotype here. So I'd like you guys to, if you pick number 4, discuss those kinds of things. So the essay should be 12 font, Times New Roman, and double spaced. All quotes should be cited properly, right? MLA format. If you use outside sources, right, especially if you do number 4, but even if you do 1, 2, or 3 and do some Google searches, then you should cite those too, right? Cite everything. I don't tolerate plagiarism, as you all well know. So this is due on June 23rd at midnight at the very latest. There are no extensions for this, and I would even ask, please hand this in early if you can, right? Because I'm going to have to be handing in marks on Wednesday, right? And the finals are due on Thursday, so the more time you give me, the better, right? So if you can hand your essay in on time early, I'll be happy, right? I'm not going to give bonus marks or anything, but you want the person who marks your thing to be happy. Anyway, this is worth 20% of your grade, so pay attention to it. It's due in 12 days, so or 11 days now. So make sure that you get started early, right? Finish the book early, and of course you can ask me questions as you go along. So that's the plan there. So let's get back to Sherlock Holmes. So there's a literature term that you should know here that is important to understanding Sherlock Holmes and many other stories on top of that, and that is the idea of the red herring, right? So a red herring is when you have something in a story that is looks like it's important, right? It looks like it is something significant and something you should really remember and everything like that, but which turns out to not be very important at all, or turns out to have been a sort of distraction. So, in these chapters where Watson is by himself in the Baskerville house, right, or mansion, I should say, there are going to be all sorts of details about a lot of different people, right? There's Stapleton and his sister, right? There's Barrymore and his wife. There's a mysterious man who's out in the mire, right? There's a lot of information you're going to get about the characters, and you'll hear about them. Some of it is important, right? Because, these people that Watson is talking to, Stapleton, Barrymore, Dr. Mortimer, the man in the mire, all these people are suspects, right, in the case. But some of them, they're just doing what they're doing and there's nothing actually bad about them, while others are the real deal, right? So the ones that don't actually have anything to do with the case, right? They are called red herrings, right? The term red herring, I don't quite know what it's from, but the idea is that if you see a red fish, right, that would be distracting, right? Your eye is sort of caught to it, right? But ultimately, it's just a distraction. It doesn't actually matter in the long run, right? So that's something that you're going to get in these next few chapters, right? Some of the stuff you're going to read is very important. Some of it are red herrings. So, first we've got in chapter 7 the Stapletons, right? We've got these two people who are living close to the Baskerville Hall, and we've got this man, Mr. Stapleton, who is a what they call a naturalist. Like, let's see our description of him here, right? This is chapter 7. Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running feet between me and a voice which called me by name. I turned, expecting to see Dr. Mortimer, but to my surprise it was a stranger who was pursuing me. He was small, slim, clean-shaven, prim-faced, flaxen-haired, and lean-jawed, between 30 and 40 years of age, dressed in a grey suit and wearing a straw hat. A tin box for botanical specimens hung over his shoulder, and he carried a green butterfly net in one of his hands. So, the whole thing here is that this guy is a sort of biologist type guy. Let me show you a picture. May I find a picture? There's a picture, right? He's supposed to look roughly like that. carrying around a butterfly net and getting plants and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what Stapleton is, right? He's a sort of biologist type character. Anyway, he says, "You will, I am sure, excuse my presumption, Dr. Watson," said he, as he came panting up to where I stood. "Here on the moor we are homely folk, and do not wait for formal introductions. You may possibly have heard my name from our mutual friend Mortimer. I am Stapleton of Merripit House." "Your net and box would have told me such," said I, for I knew that Mr. Stapleton was a naturalist. "But how do you know me?" "I have been calling on Mortimer, and he pointed you out to me from the window of his surgery as you passed. As our road lay the same way, I thought I would overtake you and introduce myself. I trust that Sir Henry is none the worse for his journey." So this is a neighbor guy, right? And he's coming to check in on Dr. Watson, right? And sort of greet him. Now, it's important here to note that one special thing about Stapleton is that he is a fan, right? Specifically, he's a fan of Sherlock Holmes, right? He says, just a little bit down, "It is useless for us to pretend that we do not know you, Dr. Watson," said he. "The records of your detective have reached us here, and you could not celebrate him without being known yourself. When Mortimer told me your name, he could not deny your identity. If you are here, then it follows that Sherlock Holmes is interesting himself in the matter, and I am naturally curious to know what view he may take." Right? So Stapleton is a fan of the Sherlock Holmes stories, right? Because in the Sherlock Holmes stories, Watson is writing down what Sherlock Holmes is doing, and he is publishing all of the stories. So within the stories, right? This guy, Stapleton, has read, the Adventure of the Three Students, or the Six Napoleons, or any of the other Sherlock Holmes stories. This guy has read them, right? So he knows Watson from there, right? So that's our male Stapleton here, right? And he, of course, has a sister, right? Who Watson meets, right? Who uh there's a lot. There's not too much I can say about her yet, but it is worth noting that our friend here, Henry Baskerville, seems quite interested in her. Right? So he thinks that she's a good-looking lady and everything like that, and wants to get to know her a bit more. But her brother does not like that idea, right? Her brother, I could say, is quite protective of him. Now then, uh, there's also, well, should I talk about the letter first? Well, yeah, I'll talk about Barrymore first. So then there's Barrymore, the butler, right? And he's got some suspicious things happening with him, right? At the end of chapter 8, you see that Watson describes him. Right, here it is. Where he says, "You are aware that I am not a very sound sleeper, and since I have been on guard in this house, my slumbers have been lighter than ever. Last night, about 2 in the morning, I was roused by a stealthy step passing my room. I rose, opened my door, and peeped out. A long, black shadow was trailing along the corridor. It was thrown by a man who was walking slowly down the passage with a candle in his hand. He was in shirt and trousers, with no covering to his feet. I could merely see the outline, but his height told me it was Barrymore. He walked very slowly and circumspectly, and there was something indescribably guilty and furtive in his whole appearance. I've told you that the corridor is broken by the balcony which runs round the hall, but that it was resumed upon the farther side. I waited until he had passed out of sight, and then I followed him. When I came round to the balcony, he had reached the end of the farther corridor, and I could see from the glimmer of light through an open door that he had entered one of the rooms. Now all these rooms were unfurnished and unoccupied, so that his expedition became more mysterious than ever. The light shone steadily as if he were standing motionless. I crept down the passage as noiselessly as I could, and peeped round the corner of the door. Barrymore was crouching at the window with the candle held against the glass. So this butler is taking mysterious midnight or 1 a.m., 2 a.m. walks through the house with a candle, right? He's going up to a window and he's holding the candle to the window. So, that's kind of suspicious as well. So, all of these things are information that is being presented to you, the reader. Some of it is very important, but other parts of it are red herrings, right? So, some of this might be pretty important later on, some of it maybe not so important after all. So, you'll be sorting that out as we go along here. Now, one thing you will notice is that the structure of Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 is a little unusual, right? Because the whole thing is narrated by Dr. Watson, of course, but the sections in Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 are letters, right? So the whole thing is not Watson remembering what happened afterwards, but rather the letters he is sending to Sherlock Holmes in the first place, right? So the whole story is told through these letters. It's not that different, right? But I just wanted to call your attention to it that when he says you there, he's talking to Sherlock Holmes and everything like that. Believe it or not, if you're looking at the history of novels, a lot of the early English novels started out as just letters, right? Like, here is a set of letters that a fictional character sent to someone else telling them about their life, right? So letters were really a big thing in the 19th century before Sherlock Holmes started. So this is the author sort of using an old technique. So, that's what's going on for chapters 8 and 9, right? Watson's investigation is going on, and we're getting a lot of these red herrings. So I hope over the weekend that you guys can read up to, at the very least, chapter 11, so we can find out who the... Oh yeah, that's the other thing, right? There's a mysterious man living in the moor, right? Here, let me find that. So this is at the end of chapter 9, right? This is towards the end of chapter 9, second last paragraph. And it was at this moment that there occurred a most strange and unexpected thing. We had risen from our rocks and were turning to go home, having abandoned the hopeless chase. The moon and lower light was low upon the right, and the jagged pinnacle of a granite tor stood against the lower curve of its silver disk. There, outlined as black as an ebony statue on that shining background, I saw a figure of a man upon the tor. Do not think it was a delusion, Holmes. I assure you that I have never in my life seen anything more clearly. So there's this mysterious man living in the moor, right? Watson sees him in the dark, and he does not know who it is, right? So there's this mysterious figure lurking out in the moorlands, right? So there's that as well, right? A tor, by the way, Tor, right? That one word that Watson used, right? I saw the figure of a man upon the tor, right? That's this, right? A tor is that kind of rock formation type thing, right? So that's what he's talking about. Anyway, there's that mysterious man. We don't know what's going on there, but, well, perhaps we'll find out, right? So read up to chapter 11 over the weekend. It would be a good idea to start thinking about the CPT, right? The faster you finish this book, the faster you can write the CPT, right? So you want to do that as soon as possible. So make sure you're not falling too far behind, and we will pick this up next time. So I hope you guys are enjoying the book, and feel free to ask me any questions that you have. And thanks so much for watching. So see you guys next time. Actually, wait, hold on. Dragos, you had something to say? Meow, yes. You should ignore the red herring. It's not Stapleton. It's not the Moore person. It's not Barrymore. It was the dog. Dogs are bad. Meow. Okay, guys, I will see you next time.